Hey, this is Alex Winter, and you are watching CoinSpice.
Thanks for tuning in. This is your host, C. Edward Kelso, Editor-in-Chief out at CoinSpice.io, back with another CoinSpice podcast. And this is the first in a series of conversations we have dedicated to the May 15th, 2020 Bitcoin Cash network upgrade. It's a scheduled hard fork that happens twice a year. And this particular one falls right in the midst of a huge debate within the community, and we're getting the upgrade and the status of the Bitcoin Cash community through the lens of Séchet, how he sees it. We, in this particular episode, talk about the nitty-gritty of 3/4 of the upgrade and the philosophy behind it, and you kind of get a better sense of where he stands in terms of transaction limits being upped and some of the other finer points here. But again, it is a first in a longer series of episodes, so we're going to be publishing them subsequently as the days and weeks roll on here leading up to the upgrade. I think you're going to find it provoking, interesting. For some, it's going to just solidify their feelings about Séchet. For others, it may open their mind a bit. But regardless, he is a very influential figure within the Bitcoin Cash community, and this is a super interesting time for peer-to-peer electronic cash and its future. So enjoy this episode, but again, remember that this is just the beginning, and we're going to be publishing more of this conversation, quite lengthy, in-depth conversation, and it gets spicy as it goes on. So sit back, get yourself a cool glass of milk, almond milk, if you're a vegan and you go that way, whatever makes you comfortable. And here is, again, Amaury Séchet, lead developer for Bitcoin ABC, as we get ready for the May 15th, 2020 upgrade. Well, all right. We've got him back, the man at the center of it all. Amaury Séchet, the benevolent dictator, the lead dev over at Bitcoin ABC, reference implementation for Bitcoin Cash. And we're in for a spicy episode. I can just feel it when you talk to Amaury, either online or and prepping for the show here. There's a little gleam in his voice he's got something to say, and I can't wait to try to fish it out of him here. But before we go too much further, Amaury, man, I know you're a busy dude and you have lots on your plate, so thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Very cool. Well, first off, you've got an upgrade coming up as we're recording here in slightly less than 2 weeks. And is this the fourth or the fifth upgrade that you're seeing us through here in the Bitcoin Cash community?
I don't know. I guess it's the fourth, but I don't know. I don't really keep track of that.
But there's a track record there of bringing these upgrades along, which I know is themselves are something left to debate as far as their frequency going forward and whether they're a bug or a feature, but nevertheless, it's something that is on the agenda here. And there are four, as I understand them, four basic parts of the May 15th scheduled upgrade for Bitcoin Cash, the network, included in version, I guess it's 21. So let me see. Yeah, it's version 0.21.0. The four include a chain limit.
Yeah, any version 0.21. whatever is good to go for the upgrade.
Okay, good. We'll have links to all this, by the way, in the show notes. Of the four parts, three, I guess, I'd say were non-controversial, and then one is sort of the biggie here. But the first three that we have are transaction chain limit increase. Then we have the op reverse bytes and SigChecks. If you don't mind, we'll take them in order and kind of hit the most controversial last. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about what you're anticipating from this upgrade, in particular with regard to chain limit? I know that Satoshi Dice had something to say about that, and that's been an issue for a while. But
yeah, they had a lot to say about it, up to the point where it reached a point in the discussion where it needed to be funded in some way, and then they didn't have that much to say about it anymore.
And you're talking about the bounty and so on?
Yeah, well, like the problem is that you cannot engage an ongoing maintenance burden based on some promise that some anonymous person made on Reddit, right? It's just not, it's not how the professional world works, you talk to people, you negotiate something, you make a contract, and you work based on that. And specifically in the case of the transaction limit, the limit is there because of the way the mempool works mostly. And the mempool is at the center of like everything that happens in the node software. So the node software have a few parts, right? But what's happening is that you have transactions that are sent on the network, and the node receive them like through the network layer and verify that they are valid, and then they go in the mempool. And then when you mine, the mining process look at what is in the mempool, prepare a block template to be sent to the miner so that they can grind on it and find the proof of work. And then when you find a new block, you validate the block, and then you go back to the mempool and you update the mempool based on what is in the block. And so as a result, the mempool is connected to everything in the block, in the node. And so if you want to change how the mempool works, you end up having ramification in the whole node software. It's not just like, you can change this and that and change that configuration and you get a different behavior. It's essentially you need to re-architecture the whole stuff, which means that we cannot backport from core as much as we do now, and we do a lot because they have way more resources than we do. And so it would be, it would be foolish from us to not take advantage of that. And so as a result, if we are to change that significantly, then we end up with a maintenance burden that is way bigger than what we have now, and that we effectively cannot carry if we are going to be realistic.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and you see in the space, like a lot of people essentially like don't care about that, and they're like, oh, we're gonna change everything, and then they end up with node software that they can barely maintain, and this has led to very bad outcome in the past. But it seems that it seems that some people have not learned very much from the whole process anyway.
Yeah, it was sort of oversimplified as I was reading it. That it was just these intransient devs who, obviously wanted to essentially control everything versus the go-go capitalists who wanted everything open and free and so on and so forth. But
well, no, this is not true.
Right.
This is not true, and well, obviously, like I'm not even gonna address the dev stuff because I'm gonna say, oh, this is not true for the dev, but people are gonna be like, oh, he's a dev, so like obviously he's gonna say that. So that's not very interesting. But I completely disagree that the people opposing that are the capitalist one, because the whole point of a market economy is that if you want something to happen, you pay for it and someone is gonna do it. And if you don't pay for it, then you signal to the market that you actually don't really give a crap about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you expect people to do stuff for free, then that's fine, but you don't get to call yourself like a free market advocate or whatnot. Like this is not the position you're having, because you are not signaling through the market that you actually want that problem to be solved.
Yeah, it is. It's a really interesting. So if in case there's a casual listener out there who's clicked on the podcast and isn't familiar with sort of Bitcoin Cash culture, and I'm about to make a very broad generalization, but as it goes, we're considered sort of the anarcho-capitalist, go-go capitalist version of things. And so if you really want to upset somebody in the Bitcoin Cash community, insist that they're some kind of socialist. Like that's the worst kind of slur you can throw our way. And so it's interesting that two camps.
It's true, but
yeah,
but people have got hang on the word, but they forgot what it means.
Right.
because I think the core of the market is the idea that price is a signal wrapped in an incentive, right? This is the
It's a
core idea of the
communication
market.
device. It's almost a language, right?
Yeah. So if you take, for instance, let's say face mask, right? Like, because this is the COVID-19 crisis, right?
Mm-hmm.
So face mask, like suddenly there is way more demand for face masks than they used to be only a few months ago. And so what happened is that the supply and demand shift and the price goes higher. And because the price goes higher, then this is a signal to various market participants that they need to be producing masks now if they have the capability to do so, instead of producing something else, right? Like you have a lot of company that can produce masks or can produce something else, based on the based on the manufacturing capability that they have. And maybe they are not the most efficient one at producing masks, right? So in day-to-day operation, like in normal operation mode, I'd say they wouldn't produce masks because they just have competitors that are more efficient than they are, and they produce like whatever they are good at producing. But now that there is so much more demand for masks, then people are willing to pay a higher price, and so those people know they can get into the mass market. And so what you see as a result is that, on one end, the price of masks increase, but on the other end, it's a signal. It's both a signal and an incentive for people that have the capability to produce masks to do so. And this is how the market works. And this is like, the whole beauty of this stuff is that nobody needs to really synchronize with anybody else. It just automatically adapts to where people are willing to put their resources.
There's kind of I guess in the Hayekian sense, there's sort of an emergent order out of seeming chaos.
Yeah, there is an emergent order, and the communication device, because there need to be some communication for the order to take place, and the communication device is the price mechanism.
Yeah. It is interesting. So the import there, which and I don't want to gloss over your point, because I think we're going to keep coming back to it, to be honest with you, in this conversation. But the sort of the import here now is that you guys or ABC is going to raise the transaction limit from 25 to 50. And so did you finally get sort of that, price? Did you finally get that incentive, that communicative mechanism to make you do that, or does it make more
no,
sense?
not really. What we did is that we ran a few benchmarks. So it's like, developer lingo for, we tested the software, and so it performed with various value. And we saw that bumping it to 50, like right now it's 25, bumping it to 50 is not a very big risk. And so we're going for that because people are asking for it. But you got to understand, like, this is a small change that we can do because the software as it is can support it, but this is not, this move us no closer to getting rid of that limit, or
Right.
improving it significantly to many hundred or thousands of blockchain transaction if we wanted to.
Yeah, it's kind of kicking the can down the road a bit, satisfying in the United States, in the southern part of the United States, we call it kissing your cousin, where kind of no one's satisfied. Like, if you raise it, by 25, they go, well, what? Just take the transaction limit off, and then you're trying to explain, look, it comes with a seen cost, which is just the coding part of it, and then a seemingly unseen cost, which is being less able to backport and to take from core, which we sort of rely on, which gets into another part of what ABC is trying to do going forward in terms of owning the code.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. This
So,
is one of those change where the cost in terms of maintenance is actually way higher than the cost of actually doing it.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me a lot of politicians here in the U.S. where they throw these mandates on businesses, and a few years ago, legislators, some wag somewhere in my state of California, decided, look, every legislation is going to have with it a price tag. You're going to have to. So even if it's just a seemingly unmarket all employees have to wash their hands or something uncontroversial, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to have to come with that legislation's got to come with a price. How much is this going to cost businesses to implement? And I think that's a really interesting way to judge things, because as you've said, which I think a lot of people don't think about, on the rhetoric of central planning versus let the market decide, and all these things that I believe.
But we are letting the market decide,
exactly,
right? Like, and the market decides that it's not worth the price at the moment.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's an interesting debate that keeps kind of falling back on itself. But I'm going to skip just ahead a little bit to the op reverse bytes, and the op return ideas have been, I think, largely praised in the Bitcoin Cash community. I can't recall, other than the actual split, the op returns becoming controversial. But go into the reverse bytes and what that means.
Yeah. So I don't know much, I don't know much detail I need to give on that, because there is a lot of baggage that come with it. But basically in Bitcoin, there is a script language, and the script language allows you to do various smart contracts. Not as rich as Ethereum, for instance, but it's essentially a different trade-off, because it's way more scalable than the way Ethereum does it, but it's a bit more limited in capabilities. Anyway, people have been developing a ton of stuff on BCH, notably various contracts to do stuff like mecenas, to do recurring payment, or various covenants and whatnot. So people have been experimenting with contract and done various stuff. And one of the things that has happened in that process is that some people have used Big Indian and some people have used Little Indian to encode their data. And so what that means for people that are not familiar is that in a computer, every data that you have, it can be like a song or a video or this podcast or the web page or anything, right? It's just bytes. And there have been this madness going in the computer world about Endianness. And Endianness is about the orders in which you put the byte, right? Like, so do you start to read them from index 0 to index n if you have n byte, or do you start at index n and you go back to 0? And some computer program do it one way, and some computer program do it the other way, and some kind of CPU do it one way, some kind of CPU do it the other way. So it's like an eternal gotcha of programming. And it's more or less established right now that we're not gonna conclude this one. And the same has happened within script. Some people have choose to do stuff in Big Indian, and some people have choose to do stuff in Little Indian. And for each of those systems, it's just fine, right? But you start to have problem with those systems needs to talk to each other, because suddenly the bytes are not in the right order. And so we introduced an opcode that is called op reverse byte, and that does exactly what it says. It reverses the bytes. And so if you have a system that works in Big Indian and your system works in Little Indian, and you want to process some data that come from that other system, at some point you're gonna have to reverse the bytes in between. And this is why we introduced that opcode, so that systems that are in Big Indian can talk to systems that are in Little Indian and vice versa.
And in the scheme of things, how important is this? Just your tone and the way that you speak about it, it sounds like something that just needs to be done. But is this something that investors would be particularly interested in?
Well, people that are into like smart contract and tokens and this kind of stuff should be enthusiastic about that. It really depends what you're interested in.
Yeah.
If you're interested in like in the hard money property, I guess it doesn't change that much. If you're into the whole token smart contract kind of stuff, I think it's it's a very nice addition.
Yeah, and as you're talking, I think a lot about what that tension between what we call the token boys and the hard money guys. I think that's real interesting. So from the reverse bytes, we get into SigChecks, and this is the one that I don't think I understand at all. What's happening there on the 15th with the network and SigChecks?
So that shouldn't change much for most users, but so you know about the block size, right? Like you cannot produce a block that is absurdly big and have all the network process it, because you would just bring down a lot of the network, and there is just not, the kind of demand on the network to justify a block that big. So it's obviously someone that is trying to waste everybody's resources. As it turned out, there is another way to waste everybody's resources. It's not producing a block that is very big, but producing a block that have a lot of operations that are expensive to validate or to verify, right? And so if you do that, you have a block that is not that big, but that is very expensive to validate anyway. And so you end up with a lot of the same problem as when you produce a block that is absurdly big. And the most expensive operation that you can do in the block by far is signature check. So, like every time you spend some coins, there is a key that is associated with those coins, and you produce a signature that is effectively a proof that you own the private key that is associated with the coin and that you authorize the transaction to proceed, right? And verifying that transaction is somewhat expensive, but for regular transaction, it's okay. It's not that crazy. But you can do transaction purposefully that have an absurdly large number of signature operation, right? And now you're gonna send to the network transactions that are absurdly expensive for everybody to validate. So to avoid that problem, there is a mechanism that exists today that is a limit in the number of SIGOPs that a block can have and that a transaction can have. The problem is that system has been built completely as backward to begin with. I'm not sure who introduced that in the first place. Maybe it was directly Satoshi, or like one of the early Bitcoin dev anyway, realized that this was a problem and introduced that. But at the time they didn't have a good grasp of they didn't have as much of an understanding of the whole system as we do now, and they did it kind of the wrong way. So the way they did it doesn't really prevent the attack, and it's also expensive so it's also self-defeating in a way, because it's expensive to do the check that are required to count the SIGOPs in the way it's done currently. So you want to avoid producing something that is too expensive to validate, and in the process you introduce an extra step in the validation that is quite expensive. So it's a bit of a self-defeating mechanism. And so we are changing the way this mechanism works so that it's way less expensive to compute, first. And second, it's actually way more accurate as well. And so as a result, we can actually prevent the attack that it's meant to prevent.
That's really interesting. So these upgrades come every 6 months, and there seems to be a kind of a triage. So the upgrade is in addition to the work that ABC does in just maintaining the network software, right?
Yeah, and in term of volume of work, it's actually not the biggest part. By far, people are like, like white dev are spending all their time doing upgrades and stuff, and the reality is we don't spend that much time on that. This is by far not the hardest part of it.
Is there a danger, and I do know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there a danger that these upgrades kind of punch above their weight, or I'm trying to think of a better cliche here, sort of suck the energy out of the room in the sense that the community can spend a lot of time arguing about the upgrade, and the shiny new thing, or what should be upgraded or shouldn't be, and so on. Whereas really the fundamental infrastructure work that needs to be done is sort of the major issue. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I'm not sure this so much about the upgrade though, because you could always change, you could always change stuff that are not, hard fork upgrade per se and get into the same problem. Like, Core introduced SegWit, and now they are talking about Taproot and a bunch of other stuff. And this is the same, like this is the new shiny new toy. And people who want to focus on that are gonna focus on that. But it's actually the same for Core, like all those stuff, like, Taproot and SegWit and stuff, are very much not the bulk of the work that they do. It's a small portion as well, and I think the Core community understand that way better than the BCH community.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that. And until you said it, I don't think I had quite had it crystallized in my mind, but it makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad you clarified that.